In the city of Lyon, graced by the serene waters of the Rhône and the Saône, an ostensibly perfect love story had been unfolding for 3 decades. Jade and Mathis Durand were the couple everyone admired, envied, and aspired to become. Married for exactly 30 years, they seemed to have discovered the secret formula for a lasting and happy relationship. Mathis Durand, aged 58, was a renowned surgeon at the Édouard Herriot Hospital. His name was synonymous with medical excellence not only in Lyon but throughout France. With his skilled hands and sharp intellect, he saved lives daily, earning the respect and admiration of his colleagues and patients alike. His imposing presence, gray hair, and piercing blue eyes made him a charismatic figure in the hospital corridors. "Dr. Durand, you truly are a miracle of modern medicine," exclaimed a young nurse after an especially difficult operation. Mathis smiled modestly, his eyes shining with pride. "It's a team effort, my dear. We all do our part." While Mathis shone in the medical world, Jade, at 55, dedicated herself entirely to her home and husband. With her natural elegance and warm smile, she was the perfect hostess, the devoted wife, and the support pillar Mathis needed for his demanding career. Their apartment in the Presqu'Isle district reflected Jade's good taste and attention to detail. Every room exuded an air of unpretentious sophistication, with carefully selected artworks adorning the walls and lovingly restored antique furniture. One Saturday afternoon, as Jade prepared dinner for some of Mathis's colleagues, the couple chatted in the kitchen. "Mathis, darling, do you think we should open that Bordeaux we won last year?" Jade asked while precisely chopping vegetables. Mathis, adjusting his tie in the dining room mirror, replied, "Excellent idea, my love. You know how much Dr. Leblanc appreciates fine wine." Jade smiled, admiring her husband in the reflection. "You look magnificent tonight. I'm sure everyone will be impressed by the new article you're going to present." "It's thanks to you, my dear. Without your support, I wouldn't be half the man I am today," Mathis said, bending down to kiss his wife tenderly. To the outside world, the Durands were the epitome of the perfect couple. Their appearances at social events were always marked by admiring glances and envious whispers. Mathis, with his charm and intelligence, and Jade, with her grace and dedication, formed an unbeatable duo. At the hospital, Mathis's colleagues often commented on his fortune. "How do you do it, Mathis? 30 years of marriage and you still look like newlyweds," joked a colleague during lunch. Mathis laughed, his eyes gleaming with genuine pride. "The secret is having a wife like Jade. She makes everything easier." However, behind the facade of perfection, there were nuances unnoticed by others. In her moments of solitude, Jade sometimes wondered if she had sacrificed too much of herself in the name of her marriage and her husband's career. In her youth, she had her own dreams, traveling the world, pursuing a career in art, that were carefully folded away and stored in a metaphorical drawer of her mind. Mathis, on the other hand, bore the weight of expectations. Being the best at everything, the best surgeon, the best husband, the best in society, was a constant pressure he rarely admitted to himself. Yet, when doubts arose, they were quickly dispelled. After all, they had built an enviable life together. Quiet evenings at home, elegant dinners with friends, annual vacations on the Côte d'Azur, everything seemed so perfectly orchestrated that questioning it seemed almost sinful. During one of those quiet evenings, as Mathis read a medical journal and Jade quietly embroidered, a moment of silent connection passed between them. A look, a smile, and both felt a wave of gratitude for what they had built together. "You know, Jade," Mathis broke the silence, putting down the paper, "sometimes I wonder what our life would have been like if we had taken different paths." Jade stopped her embroidery and looked at her husband with curiosity. "What do you mean, darling?" "Oh, nothing important," he smiled, dismissing the thought. "I'm just grateful we chose this path together." Jade nodded, her smile hiding a complexity of emotions she didn't fully understand herself. "Me too, darling. Me too." Thus, on the surface, the Durand's life continued in its apparent perfection. A well-oiled symphony of love, success, and domestic harmony. But like any great work, discordant notes lurked between the lines, waiting for the right moment to be heard. The immaculate facade of the Durand's life began to show imperceptible cracks to the inattentive eye. While Jade devoted herself to her home and social obligations, Mathis kept a secret that threatened to bring down the entire edifice they had built over 3 decades. At Edouard Herriot Hospital, between surgeries and consultations, Mathis led another life. In the quiet corridors and empty rooms, far from the admiring gazes of his colleagues, he shared moments of forbidden passion with Sophie Leclerc, a 32-year-old nurse. Sophie, with her brown hair and vibrant green eyes, was the opposite of Jade in many ways. Energetic, ambitious, and full of life, she brought a splash of color to the monochrome world Mathis didn't even realize he was living in. "Mathis, are you sure no one suspects anything?" Sophie whispered, adjusting her uniform after a furtive encounter in the doctor's lounge. Mathis smiled, running a hand through his gray hair. "Don't worry, my dear. I'm discreet, always have been." But Mathis's discretion was about to be tested. On an apparently ordinary afternoon, Jade decided to surprise her husband by bringing him lunch at the hospital. Smiling and carrying a carefully prepared basket, she walked through the familiar corridors, greeting nurses and doctors who had known her for years. Turning a corner, Jade froze. Through a small window of a consultation room, she saw a scene that shattered her world in seconds. Mathis, was in the arms of a young nurse, locked in a passionate kiss that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Jade's world collapsed silently. With trembling legs, she backed away, dropping her lunch basket. The noise alerted the couple in the room, but when Mathis opened the door, he found only the remnants of what should have been his lunch scattered on the floor. That evening, the Durand household, normally a haven of tranquility, became the stage for an emotional storm. Jade, with a calm that concealed inner turmoil, confronted her husband as soon as he crossed the threshold. "How could you, Mathis?" she said in a low, pain-filled voice. 30 years thrown away for an affair." Mathis, caught off guard, initially tried to deny it. "Jade, what are you talking about? I don't understand." "I saw you, Mathis. At the hospital. With that, nurse." The last words came out as a hiss. Mathis's face paled, the mask of perfection crumbling before his wife's accusing eyes. For a moment, time seemed to slow, guilt weighing heavily on his shoulders. Then, like a cornered animal, he lashed out. "And what did you expect?" His voice rose, a mix of shame and anger. "Do you think it's easy being who I am, bearing the weight of everyone's expectations? While you stay here, cozy at home, Cozy?" Jade interrupted, her voice trembling with indignation. "I've devoted my life to you, Mathis. My dreams, my ambitions, everything." The argument quickly escalated. Years of unspoken resentment, stifled dreams, and unmet expectations surged to the surface. Words flew like poisoned arrows, each hitting vulnerable points that had been carefully hidden for years. Mathis, consumed by rage and shame at being caught, lost control. "Get out," he shouted, pointing to the door. "Get out of this house." Jade, shocked by her husband's violent reaction, stepped back. 30 years of shared life seemed to dissolve into the air like smoke. With trembling hands, she grabbed her bag and headed for the door. But before leaving, she turned around. With a calm that contrasted with the chaos of the scene, Jade pulled an envelope from her bag and handed it to Mathis. "You have 2 months to live," she said, her voice strangely devoid of emotion. "Make the most of it." Mathis, stunned, mechanically took the envelope. When he looked up from the paper, he saw only Jade's back disappearing through the door without looking back. The sound of the door closing echoed in the empty house, marking the end of an era and the beginning of something unknown and terrifying. The sound of the door closing behind Jade echoed through the house, leaving Mathis in a state of shock and confusion. He stood in the middle of the room, the envelope still in his trembling hands, as his mind tried to digest the events of the past few minutes. 2 months to live, he muttered to himself, incredulous. Jade's words echoed in his head, mingling with the guilt and fear that began to settle in his chest. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Mathis found the courage to open the envelope. Inside, he found a series of medical tests and a diagnosis that chilled him to the core. The documents described a rare and aggressive disease with a grim prognosis. "This can't be true," he murmured, flipping through the documents with trembling fingers. As a renowned doctor, he was fully aware of the terms and graphs before him, but his mind refused to accept what he was seeing. Mathis spent the next few hours in a state of denial and panic. He paced the room, stopping occasionally to reread the documents, as if expecting the words to magically change. Jade must be bluffing, he tried to convince himself. This is just a cruel revenge for my indiscretion. But a part of him, the rational and medical part, knew the tests were real. The symptoms described in the report started to make sense: the fatigue he had been feeling for weeks, the pains he had attributed to work stress. As the night wore on, Mathis lost himself in memories. Moments spent with Jade over the years flashed through his mind like a fast-forwarded film. Their wedding day, the birth of their children, the trips, the quiet evenings at home. And in every memory, he saw Jade, always there, always supporting him, always there for him. "What have I done?" he groaned, sinking into the couch and covering his face with his hands. The realization of his betrayal, not just marital but also emotional, began to weigh heavily on him. Mathis thought of Sophie, the young nurse who had become his lover. What had seemed exciting and invigorating now felt empty and insignificant in the face of what he had thrown away. With dawn came a new wave of panic. Mathis rushed to the phone and frantically dialed Jade's number. Voicemail. He tried again and again, increasingly desperate. "Jade, please," he pleaded into the voicemail. "Come home. We need to talk. I'm sorry." But only silence answered his calls. In the days that followed, Mathis oscillated between denial and despair. He continued to go to the hospital, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but his colleagues noticed the change. "Mathis, are you okay?" asked Dr. LeBlanc, his longtime friend, after seeing him make a basic mistake during a consultation. "I'm fine," Mathis replied curtly, avoiding his colleague's gaze. At home, the nights were torturous. Jade's absence was palpable in every room. Mathis found himself staring at the empty side of the bed, her favorite chair in the living room, the cookbooks in the kitchen she loved so much. A week passed, and the symptoms described in the tests began to manifest more intensely. Mathis experienced pains he couldn't explain, fatigue that the strongest coffee couldn't dispel. In a moment of desperation, he called Sophie. "Mathis," she answered, surprised. "I thought we agreed not to talk for a while." "Sophie, I need you," his voice was weak. "Something's wrong. Very wrong." There was a pause on the other end. When Sophie spoke again, her voice was cold and distant. "I'm sorry, Mathis. But I think it's best if we don't see each other anymore. Goodbye." The click of the call ending sounded like a gunshot to Mathis. He was alone. Truly alone. Sitting on the floor of his bedroom, surrounded by medical tests and old photos, Mathis finally let the tears come. Tears of regret, fear, and loneliness. "Jade," he murmured into the empty room, "what have I done? What have we become?" The silence of the house was his only answer, leaving Mathis to face not only the prospect of his mortality but also the consequences of his choices. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions and sensations for Mathis. Each morning he awoke, hoping it was all a bad dream, but reality hit him with renewed force as soon as he opened his eyes. The symptoms, once subtle and easily ignored, now manifested with alarming intensity. The fatigue he had previously attributed to overwork turned into debilitating exhaustion. Mathis, who once prided himself on his endurance during long surgeries, now barely managed to complete a consultation without feeling completely drained. "Dr. Durand, are you okay?" an anxious nurse asked after seeing him lean heavily against the corridor wall. Mathis forced a smile. "Just a bit tired. Nothing a good night's sleep won't fix." But the nights brought no rest. Intense pain kept him awake, making him toss and turn in bed, searching for a position that would bring relief. During one of these sleepless nights, Mathis decided he couldn't ignore what was happening any longer. The next morning, he scheduled a series of tests at the hospital. As a doctor, he knew exactly what to ask for and how to expedite the process. Blood tests were taken, scans were performed, and Mathis waited anxiously for the results. It was Dr. LeBlanc, his longtime friend and colleague, who brought the results. The expression on his face spoke volumes before he even opened his mouth. "Mathis," LeBlanc began, his voice grave, "the results aren't good." Mathis nodded, having already suspected as much. "How bad is it, Jean?" LeBlanc spread the scans out on the table. "There are clear signs of a serious illness. The fatigue, the pain, it all fits. But..." He hesitated, frowning, "there's something strange. We can't pinpoint the exact cause." Mathis felt a chill run down his spine. As experienced doctors, they were used to diagnosing a wide range of conditions. The fact that they couldn't identify the cause of his illness was alarming. "What are our options?" Mathis asked, trying to keep his voice steady. LeBlanc sighed. "We need to run more tests. Perhaps consult with specialists. Mathis, you need to take a leave of absence from work. Your condition is deteriorating rapidly." LeBlanc's words echoed in Mathis's mind. Stepping away from his work meant losing the one thing that still anchored him, that distracted him from thoughts of Jade and his own mortality. In the days that followed, Mathis underwent an endless battery of tests. Each specialist proposed a new theory, a new possibility, but no definitive conclusion. Frustration grew among the doctors and patients alike. "It's as if his body is self-destructing," commented an oncologist, scratching his head as he analyzed the results, "but we can't identify the trigger." Mathis, lying in a hospital bed after yet another series of examinations, felt increasingly weak. His weight loss was visible, his once strong features now gaunt, and dark circles marked his eyes. During a particularly painful night, when the pain seemed unbearable, Jade's words echoed again in his mind, "You have 2 months to live. Make the most of it." A terrible thought began to form. What if Jade wasn't merely giving a diagnosis? What if she was the cause? No, Mathis told himself, she wouldn't do that. Not Jade. But the seed of doubt was planted. As his strength waned day by day and without a clear diagnosis, Mathis began to consider possibilities that once seemed absurd. He attempted to contact Jade again, leaving desperate messages. "Jade, please," his voice trembled as he recorded another message, "I need to talk to you. I'm really sick. Please come back." But only silence answered. Jade had completely disappeared, taking with her the answers Mathis desperately sought. As his condition worsened and the days grew darker, Mathis found himself grappling not only with his mortality but also with the mistakes of his past. Each pain, each wave of nausea, each sleepless night reminded him cruelly of the choices that led him to where he was. Thus, between inconclusive tests and nights of agony, Mathis Durand, once a renowned surgeon, watched his life slip through his fingers, not understanding what was happening and without the person he most desired by his side. Mathis's desperate search for Jade intensified as his health continued to deteriorate. Each passing day, he felt himself losing not only physical strength but also his sanity. The idea that Jade might have something to do with his condition gnawed at him, though part of him refused to believe it. Determined to find answers, Mathis decided to hire a private detective. Pierre Moreau, a former police officer with decades of experience, listened intently as Mathis recounted the events of the past weeks. "Dr. Durand," Pierre said, furrowing his brow, "are you sure you want to pursue this? Sometimes what we discover isn't what we want to know." Mathis nodded gravely. "I need answers, Mr. Moreau. I can't continue like this." Pierre began his investigation by tracing Jade's movements. Meanwhile, Mathis sank deeper into paranoia and regret. Each unanswered phone call, each closed door in his quest for information seemed to confirm his worst fears. After a week of investigation, Pierre returned with surprising results. "Dr. Durand, I found something intriguing," he began hesitantly. "Your wife visited a specialized clinic for rare diseases several times in the months leading up to her disappearance." Mathis's heart raced. "A clinic? What kind of clinic?" "It's a highly respected research center," Pierre explained. "But what's strange is that she used a false name during these visits." This revelation left Mathis stunned. Why would Jade secretly visit a clinic? And why use a false name? The questions multiplied in his mind, all more troubling than the last. Determined to solve the mystery, Mathis began to dig into his own past, looking for clues that might explain Jade's actions. In doing so, he unearthed a web of lies he had woven over the years. Conversations with former colleagues and friends revealed a picture of Mathis he barely recognized. He discovered that his obsession with work and relentless pursuit of recognition had alienated many close to him. "Mathis, you've changed so much over the years," a college friend confided. "There was a time when you cared more about people than your reputation." These words hit Mathis like a punch to the gut. He was forced to confront the truth about the man he had become, ambitious, self-centered, and often cruel in his quest for success. The betrayal with Sophie, which had seemed like a simple misstep, now appeared as a symptom of a much larger problem. Mathis realized he had betrayed not only Jade but also his own principles and values. While sorting through old documents in his office, Mathis found a letter Jade had written years ago but he had never taken the time to read, always too preoccupied with work. With trembling hands, he opened the time-worn envelope. "My dear Mathis, there are so many things I want to say to you, but words fail me. I see you drifting away a little more each day, not just from me but from everything we once valued together. Do you remember our dreams of changing the world, making a difference? Sometimes I wonder if that young idealist still exists within you. I know your work is important, but at what cost? You're losing yourself, Mathis, and I fear that when you realize it, it will be too late. I love you more than I can express. That's why it hurts so much to see you become someone I barely recognize. Please, come back to me. Not the famous surgeon, not the respected professional, but the man I married, compassionate, kind, and full of life. I'll be here, waiting and hoping you'll find your way back. With all my love, Jade." Tears streamed down Mathis's face as he read the letter, realizing all he had ignored, all he had lost over the years. Finding Jade was no longer just about survival but about redemption. As his health continued to decline and time ran out, Mathis knew he had to find Jade, not only to get answers about his condition but also to attempt to mend what he had broken so long ago. But was it too late? Mathis's health continued to deteriorate rapidly. The doctors at Edouard Herriot Hospital, once his colleagues and now his caretakers, exchanged worried glances over his bed. Treatment attempts seemed ineffective, and frustration hung in the air. One rainy Wednesday afternoon, Mathis's phone rang, interrupting the monotonous beep of the machines monitoring him. He answered with difficulty. "Dr. Durand," a cautious female voice spoke on the other end of the line. "Yes, who is this?" Mathis replied, his voice weak. "I can't reveal my identity, but I have information about your condition," the voice continued. "There is a clinic in Marseille. You must go there immediately." Before Mathis could ask any questions, the call was cut off, leaving him bewildered and confused. Despite vehement protests from his medical team, Mathis insisted on being transferred to the mentioned clinic. "It's my only chance," he asserted, his determination surprising even himself. The journey to Marseille was excruciating. Every bump of the ambulance sent waves of pain through Mathis's weakened body. But a glimmer of hope, long extinguished, began to rekindle in his chest. Upon arrival at the clinic, Mathis was immediately surrounded by a team of doctors and nurses. To his great surprise, they seemed to be expecting him. Dr. Durand approached a middle-aged doctor. "I am Dr. Elise Bertrand. We have been waiting for your arrival." Mathis, confused and exhausted, struggled to understand what was happening. How did you know?" Dr. Bertrand exchanged a meaningful look with her team before answering. "We have been following your case for some time, Dr. Durand. In fact, it was your wife who contacted us first." The mention of Jade made Mathis sit up abruptly, ignoring the pain the movement caused. "Jade? Has she been here?" The doctor nodded slowly. "Yes, and she told us everything. About your condition, the symptoms. Dr. Durand, you are suffering from an extremely rare disease. So rare that until recently, we had no effective treatment." The following hours were a whirlwind of tests, explanations, and finally, the beginning of an intensive treatment. Mathis learned that he was suffering from a very rare autoimmune disease, causing his body to attack its own organs. But how did Jade know? Mathis asked, as a nurse adjusted his fore. Dr. Bertrand sat down next to the bed, her face a mix of compassion and admiration. "Your wife is a remarkable woman, Dr. Durand. She noticed the early symptoms months before you realized something was wrong. She conducted tireless research, consulted experts worldwide, all in secret to avoid alarming you." Mathis felt tears welling up. All this time, he had mistrusted Jade, even thinking she might have poisoned him. The truth was entirely different. "The treatment you are receiving now," Dr. Bertrand continued, "is experimental. Jade managed to get you included in the trial through contacts you had established during your career but had neglected." The irony of the situation was not lost on Mathis. The same relationships he had built in pursuit of glory and recognition were now being used to save his life, thanks to Jade's relentless efforts. "Where is she now?" Mathis asked, his voice thick with emotion. Dr. Bertrand smiled gently. "She was here every day, overseeing your treatment. But..." She hesitated. "She asked not to be seen by you when you arrived." Mathis closed his eyes, finally letting the tears flow. The enormity of Jade's love and dedication hit him full force. While he betrayed and underestimated her, she silently fought to save him. "Can I see her?" he asked, almost pleading. "I'll see what I can do," Dr. Bertrand replied as she stood up, "but for now, rest. The treatment will be long and difficult." After the doctor left, Mathis was alone with his thoughts. The poisoning Jade had mentioned wasn't a threat but the experimental treatment she had secured for him. The 2 months weren't a death sentence but the estimated time for the treatment to take effect. For the first time in weeks, Mathis felt true hope. Not just of surviving his illness but of having the chance to redeem himself, to become the man Jade deserved. If she would even have him back. The days at the Marseille clinic turned into weeks. The experimental treatment Mathis was undergoing was rigorous and exhausting, but slowly, signs of improvement began to appear. He regained his strength little by little, and the tests showed a gradual reduction in the autoimmune activity in his body. During all this time, Mathis anxiously awaited news of Jade. Every time the door opened, his heart would leap, hoping to see his wife's familiar face. But she remained absent, a ghostly presence hovering over his entire recovery process. One sunny morning, as Mathis felt particularly well, Dr. Bertrand entered his room with a cautious smile. "Dr. Durand, I have good news," she began. "Your latest tests show significant improvement. I believe we can soon consider discharging you from the hospital." Mathis nodded gratefully, but he had only one question on his mind. And Jade? Does she know? Dr. Bertrand's expression softened. Yes, she knows. In fact. She hesitated a moment. She's here today and would like to see you if you're willing. Mathis's heart pounded. After weeks of waiting, the moment he had dreaded and longed for was finally here. Yes, please, he replied, his voice trembling. A few minutes later, the door opened again, and Jade walked in. Mathis felt the air leave his lungs. She looked tired, with visible dark circles under her eyes, but to him, she had never looked more beautiful. Hello, Mathis, she said softly, stopping at the foot of the bed. Jade, he replied, his voice laden with emotion. I don't even know where to start. Jade approached and sat in the chair beside the bed. Her eyes scanned Mathis's face, noting the changes wrought by illness and treatment. You don't need to say anything, she began. I know you must have a lot of questions. Mathis nodded, unable to hold back the tears that began to form. Why, Jade? Why did you do all this for me after what I did? Jade sighed deeply, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. Because, despite everything, Mathis, I still love you. I couldn't just stand by and watch you die, even though you broke my heart. She then explained how she had noticed the early symptoms months ago, how her intuition had driven her to delve deeper into research, and how she had mobilized all possible resources to find a treatment. The envelope I gave you, she continued, contained the information about the experimental treatment. The 2 months was the estimated time for the treatment to take effect. I hoped you would understand and seek help immediately. Mathis closed his eyes, guilt gnawing at him. I was a fool, Jade. A selfish, blind fool. You were saving me, and I even thought you had poisoned me. Jade reached out and gently touched Mathis's hand. I know. Dr. Bertrand told me about your suspicions. It hurt, Mathis, I'm not going to lie. But I understand why you thought that. You are an incredible woman, Jade, Mathis said, squeezing her hand softly. I don't deserve you. It's not about deserving, Jade replied firmly. It's about choices. I chose to fight for you, for us. Now the question is, what choices will you make from now on? Mathis felt the weight of that question. It was a chance for redemption, an opportunity to rebuild not just his health but also his marriage and life. I want to make things right, Jade, he said, his voice filled with determination. If you'll give me a chance, I promise to be the man you deserve, the man I should have been all these years. Jade looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching for the sincerity in his words. Finally, she nodded slowly. It won't be easy, Mathis. We have a lot to rebuild. I know, he replied. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes. At that moment, Jade pulled an envelope from her bag and placed it on the bed. These are the divorce papers, she said softly. Mathis's heart clenched, but before he could say anything, Jade continued, I brought them so we could decide together what to do with them. It's a choice we have to make together, Mathis. A new chance or a new beginning, separately. Mathis looked at the envelope, then at Jade. In that moment, he realized he was facing the most important decision of his life. Physically healed but emotionally at a crossroads, Mathis knew that his next words and actions would determine not just his future but also Jade's. The Marseille sun streamed through the hospital window, bathing the room in golden light, as if heralding a new chapter in the lives of the Durand couple.